I stood in the middle of that opulent dining room, my hands trembling as I held up the bank statements and watched my father's face drain of all color. The crystal chandelier above us sparkled with a brilliance that mocked the darkness of what I had just discovered. My mother's diamond necklace caught the light as she reached for her wine glass with shaking fingers. Around the mahogany table sat my entire family frozen in a tableau of guilt and panic. My grandfather's toast still hung in the air, those words that had shattered my entire world just moments ago. Hazel, my dear, I'm so proud of how well you've managed the university fund I set up for you. The university fund. The one I had never seen a single dollar from. The one I didn't even know existed until 30 seconds ago. If you're enjoying this story of betrayal and justice, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in my situation. Your support means everything. But let me take you back to where this all began, because the story of how I ended up confronting my family on Christmas Eve is one that started years earlier in the shadows of their neglect and my desperate struggle to survive. I was 21 years old, working 3 jobs while attending college full-time. My alarm went off at 5 every morning in my tiny studio apartment, the one with the leaking ceiling and the radiator that only worked when it felt like it. I would roll out of my secondhand mattress on the floor, shove my feet into worn sneakers, and head to my first shift at the campus cafeteria. By 7, I'd be in class trying to focus on lectures while my stomach growled because I couldn't afford breakfast. At noon, I'd rush to my second job at the library, shelving books and helping students find research materials. Then evening classes until 6, followed by my third job, waiting tables at a diner downtown until midnight. The ramen noodles stacked in my cabinet were my primary food group. I wore the same 3 outfits on rotation, all bought from thrift stores. I walked everywhere because I couldn't afford bus fare. My classmates would complain about their meal plans running low or their parents being late with the monthly allowance, and I would smile and nod pretending I understood, when really I was calculating whether I could skip dinner to save money for my textbooks. My family, the Andersons, lived 40 minutes away in a sprawling estate that looked like something out of a magazine. My father, John Anderson, was a prominent attorney with a corner office in the city's most prestigious law firm. My mother, Linda, spent her days at the country club and her evenings hosting charity galas. My younger brother, Ethan, was a sophomore at an expensive private college driving a BMW and taking ski trips to Aspen. And then there was me, the daughter they never quite knew what to do with. I saw them maybe 3 times a year. Thanksgiving, Christmas, and the occasional family gathering that I was obligated to attend. They never visited my apartment. They never asked how I was managing. When I mentioned struggling with tuition during one phone call, my mother had said, "Well, that's what student loans are for, dear," before changing the subject to talk about the new curtains she'd ordered for the living room. I had always felt like an outsider in my own family, but I told myself it was normal. Some families just weren't close. Some parents believed in tough love and teaching independence. I made excuses for them because the alternative, accepting that they simply didn't care, was too painful to bear. My grandfather, Daniel Anderson, was different. He was a self-made millionaire who had built his business empire from nothing, and he had always struck me as someone who valued hard work and integrity. But he was also distant, busy with his companies and investments, and I rarely saw him outside of holiday gatherings. When I did see him, he was kind but preoccupied, asking brief questions about school before being pulled into conversations about business or politics. The invitation to Thanksgiving dinner that year came with an elegant card on thick cream paper. I had stared at it while eating instant noodles at my desk, surrounded by unpaid bills and overdue notices. The contrast was almost laughable. I had debated not going, making up an excuse about work or exams, but something in me couldn't refuse. Maybe it was the desperate hope that this time would be different. Maybe they would finally see me. Maybe they would finally care. I showed up to the dinner in my only decent dress, a simple black number I'd found at Goodwill for $12. I had walked the last mile because my car, an ancient Honda Civic that had seen better days, had died 2 weeks earlier and I couldn't afford to fix it. I arrived with cold cheeks and wind-blown hair, slipping through the front door of the mansion while trying to make myself invisible. The house was decorated like something out of a holiday catalog. Garlands draped every banister. Candles flickered in silver holders. The dining room table was set with china that probably cost more than my entire year's rent. Family members milled about in expensive clothes, holding crystal glasses of wine, laughing and chatting about their latest vacations and business deals. I found a corner to stand in, nursing a glass of water and trying not to think about the pile of bills waiting for me at home. My brother Ethan walked past me without acknowledgement, too busy showing his cousin his new watch. My mother air kissed my cheek and immediately turned to greet someone more important. My father gave me a brief nod from across the room, then went back to his conversation about a case he'd just won. I was used to it. The invisible daughter. The one who didn't quite fit into their world of wealth and status. Dinner was served at 7. We all took our assigned seats around that massive mahogany table, and I found myself next to my young cousin Mason, who was 8, and blessedly unaware of social hierarchies. He chattered to me about his new video game while I picked at my food each bite, a reminder of the dinners I'd skipped that month to save money. Then came the moment that would change everything. My grandfather stood up at the head of the table, glass in hand, ready to give his traditional Thanksgiving toast. He was a commanding presence, even at 75, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Usually his toasts were generic blessings about family and gratitude, but this year his gaze landed on me and something in his expression softened. Before I offer the blessing, he said, his voice carrying through the room, I want to take a moment to recognize someone special. Hazel, my dear granddaughter, I want you to know how proud I am of you. I looked up startled. Every head turned in my direction. I know college hasn't been easy, he continued, but I'm so pleased to hear that you've been managing the university fund so responsibly. It warms my heart to see you working hard and using the resources I set aside for you wisely. You're going to go far, my girl. The room seemed to tilt. University fund. The words echoed in my head, not making sense. I stared at my grandfather, then at my parents. My father had gone completely still, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. My mother's smile had turned into something brittle and terrified. What fund? The words came out of my mouth before I could stop them, quiet but clear in the suddenly silent room. My grandfather's smile faltered. The university fund, dear. The one I established for you when you were 16. The $50,000 specifically for your education. $50,000. $50,000. The number kept repeating in my mind like a broken record. While I had been eating ramen and walking miles in the cold and working myself to exhaustion, there had been $50,000 sitting somewhere with my name on it. I don't know about any fund. My voice was steadier, now louder. I looked directly at my father. Dad, what is he talking about? My father cleared his throat, his face flushed. Hazel, this isn't the time or place to discuss this. You didn't tell her. My grandfather's voice had turned sharp, dangerous. John, you were supposed to help her set up access to the account when she started college. There were complications, my father said quickly, his lawyer voice sliding into place. The paperwork, the timing, it wasn't quite right too. You're lying. The words came from somewhere deep inside me, a place I didn't know existed. You're lying right now. Where's my money? Where is the fund that Grandpa set up for me? My mother jumped in, her voice syrupy and desperate. Sweetheart, you don't understand how these things work. There were expenses, family emergencies, we had to make some difficult decisions. What emergencies I was standing now, though, I didn't remember getting up. What expenses were more important than me sleeping on a mattress on the floor? What emergencies required my money while I was working 3 jobs? Little Mason tugged on my sleeve. You didn't know about the money. But Dad said you were letting Uncle John and Aunt Linda use it for important stuff. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the table at my family, at their guilty faces and averted eyes, and something inside me cracked wide open. All those years of feeling like I wasn't good enough, like I was the problem, like I was somehow failing at life while they all succeeded. And the whole time they had stolen from me. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and opened the voice recorder app. Say that again, Grandpa. Tell me exactly what you set up for me and when. Hazel, put the phone away, my father said, standing up. His voice had an edge to it now, the tone he used in courtrooms to intimidate witnesses. No. I held the phone steady. Grandpa, please. I need to hear this. I need to know what was supposed to be mine. My grandfather looked at my father with an expression I'd never seen before, something cold and hard and utterly disappointed. Then he turned to me and spoke clearly, precisely for the recording. I established a university fund for you, Hazel Anderson, in the amount of $50,000 on your 16th birthday. The fund was placed in a trust with your father, John Anderson, as the administrator until you turned 18, at which point it was to be transferred entirely to your control for educational expenses. I gave the documentation to your father 6 years ago. That's enough. My father's voice cracked like a whip. This is a private family matter, and we will discuss it later, not in front of everyone. A private family matter, I repeated, and I heard my own voice as if from a distance, cold and clear. Is that what you call stealing from your own daughter? I didn't wait for an answer. I walked out of that dining room, out of that mansion, into the cold November night. Behind me, I heard voices rising, my grandfather's angry baritone, my mother's pleading tone, chaos erupting from the perfect family gathering. But I didn't look back. I walked for an hour through the dark streets until I found a 24-hour coffee shop. My hands were numb from the cold, but I barely felt it. I sat in a corner booth with my laptop and began to search. University fund, trust fund, educational accounts, financial abuse, embezzlement. The coffee shop barista, a girl about my age with purple hair and tired eyes, brought me a cup of coffee I hadn't ordered. Rough night, she asked. You have no idea, I said, and then to my horror, I started crying. Not delicate tears, but huge gasping sobs that I couldn't control. All those years of struggle, of hunger, of exhaustion, of telling myself I just needed to work harder, be better, do more. And it had all been a lie. A lie they had told me. A lie they had maintained while watching me suffer. The barista, bless her, just handed me a box of tissues and sat down across from me. Want to talk about it? I told her everything. The dinner, the revelation, the stolen money. She listened without judgment, occasionally refilling my coffee, and when I finally ran out of words, she said, You need a lawyer. A good one. Not your dad. I don't have money for a lawyer, I said, laughing bitterly. That's kind of the whole problem. Does your school have a legal aid office? I had forgotten about that. The university did have a legal assistance program for students. I looked at the time on my phone. It was 3 a.m. The office would open at 9. I had 6 hours to get my thoughts together to gather every piece of evidence I could find. I spent those hours in that coffee shop downloading every email, every text message, every communication I'd ever had with my parents about money. I made a timeline of every time I'd asked for help and been refused. I documented my jobs, my expenses, my struggles. By the time the sun came up, I had a file that told a very clear story of a young woman who had been abandoned by her family while they lived in luxury. At 9 sharp, I was at the law school building waiting outside the legal aid office. The secretary arrived first, a kind woman who took one look at my face and immediately made me coffee. 20 minutes later, a law student named Sarah came in. She was in her final year, specializing in family law and financial disputes, and when I told her my story, her eyes lit up with a righteous anger that matched my own. This is textbook misappropriation of trust funds, she said, pulling out a legal pad. Your grandfather established you as the beneficiary. Your father was the trustee, and he violated his fiduciary duty. We can definitely pursue this. Over the next few days, Sarah became more than just my legal advisor. She became my friend, my advocate, my partner in seeking justice. We made calls to banks, requested documentation, filed information requests. Every door that opened revealed more of the truth. The $50,000 hadn't just disappeared. It had been systematically withdrawn over the years for family expenses, a new boat for my Uncle Richard, a jewelry collection for my Aunt Julie, renovations on my parents' house, a failed investment scheme my father had tried to hide, Ethan's expensive college tuition and his BMW, country club memberships, vacation homes, designer clothes. They had divided up my future and spent it on luxuries while I went hungry. My father tried to call me 12 times that first day. Then my mother. Then Ethan. I didn't answer. Instead, I saved every voicemail, every text message. They were panicking, and their messages showed it. Hazel, please, let's talk about this reasonably, from my father. Sweetheart, you're blowing this out of proportion. We were going to pay you back, from my mother. Seriously, sis. You're going to destroy the family over this, from Ethan. But there was one call I did take. My grandfather. Hazel, he said, and his voice was heavy with sorrow and rage. I need to see you. I need to know everything. We met at his office, a corner suite overlooking the city. I had never been there before, had never been invited into this part of his world. I sat across from him at his desk and laid out everything Sarah and I had discovered. Bank statements, withdrawal records, emails between my parents discussing how to manage the fund, evidence of lavish purchases made within days of large withdrawals from my trust. My grandfather listened without interrupting, his face growing harder with each revelation. When I finished, he sat in silence for a long moment, staring out the window at the city below. I trusted him, he finally said. John is my son, and I trusted him with something precious. I trusted him with your future. He stole it, I said simply. Yes. He turned back to me and I saw tears in his eyes for the first time in my life. Yes, he did. And I failed you by not checking, by not making sure you had access, by assuming that my son was a man of integrity. He reached across the desk and took my hand. Hazel, I will make this right. Whatever you need, whatever it takes. I stand with you. Those words, that promise, gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. With my grandfather's support and Sarah's legal expertise, we built a case that was ironclad. Every transaction documented. Every lie exposed. Every theft cataloged. My father tried to use his position, his connections, to shut us down. He called in favors, tried to intimidate Sarah's supervising professors, even attempted to have the legal aid office deny me service. But my grandfather had more power, more influence, and more importantly, he had the truth on his side. The weeks leading up to Christmas were a war zone. My parents showed up at my apartment building demanding to talk. I recorded those conversations too. My father offered me money, tried to bribe me into silence. We'll give you $20,000 right now if you drop this nonsense, he said through my apartment door. I saved that recording with particular care. My mother tried a different approach, showing up at my workplace with tears and apologies. We made mistakes, baby, but we're still your parents. Don't you love us? She performed her grief in front of my coworkers, trying to make me look like the villain. But I had learned something important in those weeks. Love without respect is manipulation. Family without trust is just biology. Ethan's response was perhaps the most telling. He sent me a single text. Hope you're happy, ruining everything. Mom's on antidepressants because of you. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say to someone who saw himself as the victim in this story. The legal proceedings moved forward. Sarah filed a civil suit against my parents for misappropriation of trust funds, breach of fiduciary duty, and financial abuse. The paperwork was served 2 weeks before Christmas. My grandfather made his own moves in the background. He began quietly pulling his financial support from my parents' various ventures. The investment accounts he'd set up for them were frozen. The company shares he'd gifted them over the years were placed in review. He didn't do it vindictively, but with the cold precision of a businessman who had discovered embezzlement in his organization. Because that's what it was. Embezzlement. Theft. Not a family disagreement or a misunderstanding, but a crime. Christmas Eve arrived with an invitation I hadn't expected. My grandfather called me personally. I'm hosting dinner at the house. Your parents will be there. Your brother. The extended family. I want you there too, Hazel. I want you to stand tall and let them see what they created. I don't know if I can face them, I admitted. Yes, you can, he said firmly. You've already faced the worst of it. Now it's time for them to face you. So I went. I wore a red dress that Sarah had helped me pick out, something bold and powerful that made me feel like a warrior going into battle. I did my makeup carefully, not to look pretty, but to look strong. I straightened my spine and walked into that mansion like I owned it. The atmosphere was nothing like Thanksgiving. The decorations were still beautiful, the tree still sparkled, but the air was thick with tension. People stopped talking when I entered. My mother looked like she'd aged 10 years, her face drawn and pale. My father stood by the fireplace, drink in hand, his jaw set in stubborn defiance. Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes. Dinner was a silent, excruciating affair. People picked at their food. Small talk died before it began. And then when dessert was being served, my grandfather stood up. I have an announcement to make, he said. As you all know, there has been a situation regarding the university fund I established for Hazel. My father started to speak, but my grandfather held up a hand. Let me finish, John. He turned to me and nodded. This was it. The moment we'd planned. I stood up, my legs steadier than I'd expected. I pulled out a folder from my bag, the one that contained copies of everything. Bank statements. Withdrawal records. A timeline of theft spanning 5 years. I want to tell you all a story, I began, my voice clear and calm. It's about a girl who worked 3 jobs while attending college. A girl who went hungry so she could buy textbooks. A girl who walked miles in the winter because she couldn't afford bus fare. A girl who cried herself to sleep in an apartment with no heat, wondering what she'd done wrong to deserve being so alone. I opened the folder and began to pull out documents, laying them on the table one by one like a card player revealing a winning hand. That girl didn't know that her grandfather had set aside $50,000 for her education. She didn't know that while she was struggling, her family was spending that money on boats and jewelry and country club memberships. She didn't know that her own father, a man who stood in courtrooms and talked about justice and integrity, was stealing from her. Hazel, that's enough. My father's voice was sharp, commanding. the voice that had silenced me my entire life. No. I looked at him directly without fear. It's not nearly enough. You stole from me, Dad. You and Mom took money that was meant to secure my future and you spent it on luxuries. You watched me suffer and did nothing. Worse than nothing. You told me I just needed to work harder, be more responsible, stop expecting handouts. I turned to the rest of the family, to the aunts and uncles and cousins who had benefited from my stolen fund. Uncle Richard, that boat you love so much? The one you're always posting pictures of? That was paid for with $15,000 from my trust fund. Aunt Julie, your jewelry collection? Another $10,000. The renovations on this very house? My money. Ethan's BMW. My money. His ski trips and his private school and his fraternity dues. My money. The silence was absolute. Even the grandfather clock seemed to have stopped ticking. You all knew, I continued, my voice breaking just slightly. Maybe not the details, but you knew I was struggling. You saw me at these family gatherings in the same clothes, without a car, exhausted and thin. And none of you asked. None of you cared. You were too busy enjoying what you'd stolen. My mother started crying loud, theatrical sobs. We were going to pay you back, baby, I swear. We just needed time. 5 years, I said flatly. You've had 5 years. And in that time, you could have stopped at any point. You could have said, this is wrong. Our daughter is suffering. We need to give her what's rightfully hers. But you didn't. You just kept taking. My father slammed his hand on the table, making the china rattle. That's enough. This is our family, and we will handle this privately, not with this theatrical nonsense. Too late for that. I pulled out one more document. This is a lawsuit filed with the county court. I'm suing both of you for misappropriation of trust funds, breach of fiduciary duty, and financial abuse. My lawyer estimates the total damages, including interest and compensation for my suffering, at approximately $200,000. The gasps around the table were audible. You're going to destroy this family over money, Ethan finally spoke, his voice venomous. You're really that petty? No, I said, looking at him. I'm not doing this over money. I'm doing this over betrayal. Over Liz. Over watching me struggle and doing nothing. The money is just the evidence. The real crime is that you never loved me enough to do the right thing. My grandfather stepped forward, then, his presence commanding immediate attention. I want everyone in this room to understand something. What John and Linda did wasn't just wrong, it was criminal. They violated a trust, both legal and moral. And they did it to their own daughter. He looked at my father with an expression that would have withered stone. I raised you better than this, John. I taught you about integrity, about honor, about taking care of family. And you spat on every lesson I ever gave you. Dad, please, you don't understand the pressures we've been under, the expenses my father started, but my grandfather cut him off. Silence. I don't want to hear your excuses. He turned to the room. Effective immediately, I am severing all financial ties with John and Linda Anderson. The trust funds I established for them are revoked. The shares in the family company are being reassigned. The investment accounts are closed. You're on your own now. My mother's sobs turned into wails. My father's face went from red to white to purple. You can't do this. You're my father. And Hazel is your daughter, my grandfather shot back. But that didn't stop you from robbing her blind. I picked up my folder and held it to my chest like a shield. The lawsuit is filed. My lawyer has all the documentation. You'll be served officially after the holidays. I looked at each of them in turn, these people who shared my DNA but had never truly been my family. I hope it was worth it. I hope every boat ride and every piece of jewelry and every luxury you bought with my money brought you joy. Because it's all going to come due now. I turned to leave, but my father grabbed my arm. His grip was tight, angry, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that frightened me. You ungrateful little bitch. After everything we've done for you, my grandfather moved faster than I would have thought possible for a man his age. He stepped between us, breaking my father's grip, and pushed him back. Touch her again and I'll have you arrested. Get out of my house. Both of you. Now. The rest of the evening was chaos. My parents were escorted out by my grandfather's security. Several family members left in solidarity with them, though I noticed most stayed, their expressions thoughtful and uncomfortable. My cousin Mason came up to me before his parents left. I'm sorry they were mean to you, Hazel, he said quietly. That wasn't fair. Out of the mouths of babes. After they were gone, my grandfather sat down beside me, suddenly looking every one of his 75 years. I'm sorry, Hazel. I'm so deeply sorry I didn't see what was happening sooner. "It's not your fault," I said. "It is partially. I should have checked on you. I should have made sure you had access to the fund." I got complacent, assumed that my son was handling things properly. He took my hand. "But I promise you I will make this right. Whatever you need to recover from this to build your life, you have my support." "I don't want your money," I said, and I meant it. "I just want what was mine. What you intended for me to have." "You'll get it," he said grimly. "Every penny with interest. And more if I have my way about it." The lawsuit that followed was everything Sarah had promised it would be. The evidence was overwhelming. My parents tried to fight it, hired an expensive lawyer, tried to paint me as vindictive and ungrateful. But the numbers didn't lie. The bank records didn't lie. The timeline didn't lie. The local news picked up the story. Prominent attorney sued by daughter for theft of education fund. My father's face was plastered across news websites. His law firm began an internal investigation. The Bar Association opened an ethics inquiry. Everything he'd built, the reputation he'd crafted so carefully, began to crumble. My mother tried to reach out several times, leaving voicemails that swung wildly between apologetic and accusatory. "We did our best for you. You're ruining your father's career. How can you be so cruel?" I saved every message but never responded. The turning point came 3 months after Christmas. The judge in our case was a woman in her 60s who had clearly seen everything and been impressed by none of it. She listened to both sides, reviewed the evidence, and delivered her ruling with the dispassion of someone stating simple facts. The defendants clearly and systematically misappropriated funds held in trust for the plaintiff. This wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate theft over an extended period of time. I find in favor of the plaintiff. The judgment was for the full amount I'd requested, $200,000. The original $50,000 plus interest, plus damages for emotional distress and the financial hardship I'd suffered. The judge also ordered my father to pay all legal fees. But the money wasn't the real victory. The real victory was watching my father's law license get suspended pending the ethics investigation. It was watching my mother have to sell her jewelry to pay bills. It was watching them downsize from their mansion to a modest suburban house. It was watching them face consequences for the first time in their lives. Ethan, interestingly, was the only one who eventually reached out in a way that seemed genuine. 6 months after the judgment, he sent me an email. Not a text, but an actual email, several paragraphs long. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened," he wrote. "I was angry at first, angry at you for breaking up the family. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized you didn't break anything. It was already broken. I just didn't want to see it because it was comfortable for me." He wrote about how he'd started working a job for the first time, how he'd moved out of the expensive dorm into a regular apartment, how he was paying his own tuition now through a combination of loans and work. "I don't think I ever really understood what you went through," he continued. "I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't think I deserve it yet. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to be different, to be better, to be someone who would actually deserve to call you my sister." I didn't respond immediately. I let it sit for a week considering. And then I wrote back. Just a few lines. "Thank you for saying that. I hope you mean it. Maybe someday we can try again." It wasn't much, but it was something. A tiny seed of possibility. As for me, the settlement money changed my life in ways both practical and profound. I paid off every debt I had accumulated. I bought a reliable car. I moved into a decent apartment with heat and no leaks. I quit 2 of my 3 jobs and focused on school. For the first time in years, I wasn't constantly exhausted, constantly stressed, constantly struggling just to survive. But the real change was internal. I had spent so long believing that I was the problem, that I wasn't good enough, that I needed to work harder to earn love. The lawsuit, the fight, the victory had all forced me to confront a different truth. I was worthy. I had always been worthy. And the people who should have seen that, who should have protected and supported me, had failed in their duty. That knowledge was both painful and liberating. I graduated from college with honors 18 months after that Christmas Eve confrontation. The ceremony was small, nothing fancy, but it meant everything to me because I had earned every bit of it. My grandfather was there in the front row along with his wife, my grandmother Margaret, who had stood quietly beside him through the whole ordeal. Sarah was there too, having graduated herself and started working at a nonprofit legal organization. The barista from the coffee shop came, the one who had sat with me that first horrible night. I'd stayed in touch with her and we'd become friends. My parents were not invited. After the ceremony, my grandfather took me to dinner at an elegant restaurant, the kind of place I had once felt too shabby to enter. But now I sat there with my head held high, wearing my cap and gown, feeling proud of everything I'd overcome. "What will you do now?" he asked. I had been thinking about that question for months. "I want to work in financial advocacy," I told him. "Helping people who are being taken advantage of, especially by their own families. There are so many people out there in situations like mine, and they don't know they have rights. They don't know they can fight back." His eyes shone with pride. "That's perfect. You'll be brilliant at it." He paused, then added, "I've been thinking about establishing a new fund. A scholarship fund for students who are financially independent from their families who are working their way through school. I'd like you to help me run it. If you're interested." "I'm interested," I said immediately. Over the following year, I worked with my grandfather to create the Hazel Anderson Scholarship Fund for independent students. We set up strict guidelines to prevent any possibility of misappropriation. Students would apply directly. Funds would be distributed directly to them or their schools. No family members would have access. The first year, we helped 20 students. Young people with stories similar to mine, working multiple jobs, sleeping on friends' couches, eating ramen, and fighting for an education despite the odds. Seeing their faces when they got the award letters, seeing their tears of relief and joy healed something in me that I hadn't realized was still broken. I also started working with Sarah at her nonprofit handling cases of financial abuse within families. It was harder than I'd expected, emotionally draining to hear so many stories of betrayal and theft. But it was also deeply satisfying to help people fight back, to show them that they had power, that they had rights, that they didn't have to accept mistreatment just because it came from family. My relationship with my grandfather deepened during this time. We had dinner once a week, and he told me stories about building his business, about the mistakes he'd made, the lessons he'd learned. He apologized repeatedly for not seeing what was happening with my parents, for not being more involved in my life. "I got caught up in the empire building," he said once. "I thought providing money was the same as providing love. I thought setting up a trust fund was the same as being present. I was wrong. You're here now," I told him. "That's what matters." As for my parents, I saw them once more about 2 years after the lawsuit. I was at a coffee shop near campus when my mother walked in. She looked older, worn down in a way that expensive creams and salon visits couldn't hide. She saw me, immediately froze for a moment, then walked over to my table. "Hazel," she said quietly, "can I sit down?" I considered refusing. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave, to walk away the way she'd walked away from me so many times. But another part of me, the part that had grown through therapy and reflection, was curious. So I nodded. She sat across from me, fidgeting with her purse strap. She looked nervous, uncertain, none of the polished confidence I remembered. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she started. "I don't even know if I deserve to ask. But I needed you to know that I think about what we did every single day. I see your face that night at Thanksgiving, the shock and betrayal in your eyes, and it haunts me." "Good," I said simply. "It should." She flinched, but nodded. "You're right. It should." She took a deep breath. "I want to explain, not to excuse, but to explain. Your father and I, we got caught up in trying to maintain a lifestyle we couldn't actually afford. He was making good money, but not enough for the house, the cars, the club memberships, all of it. When that trust fund was there, it felt like found money. We told ourselves we'd pay it back. We told ourselves you didn't really need it, that you were strong, capable, that you'd figure it out. While I was starving," I said, my voice flat. "While I was exhausted and alone and wondering why my own family didn't love me enough to help." Tears rolled down her cheeks, smearing her mascara. "I know. God, Hazel, I know. There's no excuse for it. We were selfish. We were cowards. We were terrible parents." She looked at me with something that might have been genuine remorse. "I've started therapy. Your father and I are separated. He's still fighting the bar association, still trying to save his career, still refusing to really look at what we did. But I can't do that anymore. I can't pretend it was anything other than what it was. We stole from our daughter. We watched you struggle and did nothing. We're the villains in this story, and I have to live with that." I sat there looking at this woman who had given birth to me but had never truly been a mother, and I felt something unexpected. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not reconciliation, but a kind of closure. She was facing the truth. That was more than my father had done. "I appreciate you saying that," I told her. "I do. But it doesn't change anything between us. You made your choices and I've made mine. I've built a life without you, and it's a good life. I don't need you in it." She nodded, more tears falling. I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. And I'm proud of you. I know I have no right to be, but I am. You became everything we should have helped you become despite us. She stood up to leave, then paused. Your grandfather talks about you all the time, you know, to anyone who will listen. He tells everyone about the scholarship fund, about the work you do, about how brilliant and strong you are. He's so proud of you, Hazel. And he's right to be. Then she left, and I sat there with my coffee processing the encounter. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation I might have once imagined. There was no yelling, no grand declarations. Just two people acknowledging a painful truth and choosing different paths forward. I never saw her again after that. I heard through my grandfather that she moved to another state, started a small business, lived modestly. My father eventually lost his law license permanently and took a job as a consultant, making a fraction of his former salary. They divorced a year later. Ethan stayed in touch with me, sporadically sending updates on his life, slowly building a bridge between us that might someday become something real. 3 years after that Thanksgiving dinner, I stood in front of a small storefront in the downtown area, looking up at the sign being installed. Anderson Financial Advocacy Services. My own practice focused on helping people navigate financial abuse, particularly within families. My grandfather had helped with the initial investment, but the rest was all me. My work. My vision. My achievement. Sarah was my partner in the practice. We'd both passed the bar, both dedicated ourselves to this specific mission. On our opening day, we had 5 clients lined up. Within a year, we had a waiting list. Every person who walked through our door carried a story of betrayal. Parents who stole their children's identities to open credit cards. Siblings who manipulated elderly parents into changing their wills. Spouses who drained joint accounts and disappeared. Partners who used financial control as a weapon. The stories varied, but the core was always the same. Someone who was supposed to love and protect them had chosen to exploit and harm them instead. And we helped them fight back. We helped them gather evidence, file lawsuits, protect their assets, reclaim their power. We won most of our cases. The ones we lost because the evidence wasn't there, not because the claims weren't valid. And even in losing, we gave people something valuable. We gave them the knowledge that what had happened to them was wrong, that they deserved better, that they had tried. My personal life bloomed in unexpected ways. I dated, fell in love, had my heart broken, fell in love again. I made friends, real friends who chose me and stood by me. I traveled to places I'd only dreamed of. I bought a small house with a garden where I grew vegetables and flowers. I adopted a dog, a scruffy rescue mutt who slept at the foot of my bed and greeted me with joy every single day. I lived, really lived, not just survived. My grandfather remained a constant presence in my life until he passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 82. I was holding his hand. His last words to me were, "I'm so proud of you, Hazel girl. You took the worst thing that happened to you and turned it into your greatest strength." That's real power. He left me a substantial inheritance, but more importantly, he left me his blessing. His belief in me. His example of what it meant to stand up for, what was right, even when it was hard, even when it meant standing against your own family. At his funeral, my father showed up. We didn't speak. We simply acknowledged each other with a nod across the cemetery. That was enough. That was all it would ever be. 5 years after that transformative Thanksgiving, I was invited to speak at a conference on financial abuse and family dynamics. I stood at a podium in front of hundreds of lawyers, social workers, counselors, and advocates, and I told my story. Not for sympathy, but as testimony. As evidence that victims could become victors. That stolen futures could be reclaimed. That families built on lies and exploitation could be left behind in favor of chosen families built on respect and genuine love. After my speech, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 20, with dark circles under her eyes and nervous hands clutching a folder. "My parents took out student loans in my name without telling me," she said quietly. "I just found out. I'm drowning in debt I didn't know existed, and they're acting like I'm crazy for being upset. Your story, hearing what you went through, it made me realize I'm not wrong to be angry. I'm not wrong to want to fight back." I took her contact information. I told her about our services. I gave her the same speech that Sarah had given me years ago in that legal aid office. "You have rights. This is illegal. You can fight this. You deserve justice." Watching her walk away with her shoulders a little straighter, her head a little higher, I felt the full circle of my journey complete itself. I had been that girl terrified and alone discovering that the people who should have protected me had instead victimized me. And now I was the person offering hope and help to others in that same position. The scholarship fund my grandfather and I had created was thriving, helping dozens of students every year. The advocacy practice was expanding, taking on more cases, hiring more lawyers. I had written a book about my experience and the legal remedies available to victims of financial family abuse. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was helping people, and that was what mattered. I thought often about that Thanksgiving dinner, that moment when my entire world had shattered and then reformed into something stronger. If my grandfather hadn't made that toast, if little Mason hadn't innocently revealed the truth, I might have gone my whole life not knowing what had been stolen from me. I might have continued to believe that my suffering was my own fault, that I just wasn't good enough, that I deserved to be forgotten and neglected. But now I knew different. I knew that my worth wasn't determined by whether my parents chose to see it. I knew that family was about more than shared DNA. I knew that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who treat you as disposable. I also knew that healing wasn't linear. There were still days when I felt that old ache, that longing for the family I'd never truly had. There were moments when I saw parents with their adult children laughing and close, and I felt the loss of what could have been. Therapy helped. Time helped. But some wounds leave scars, and that's okay. Scars are evidence of survival. On the anniversary of that fateful Thanksgiving every year, I treated myself to something special. Sometimes it was a nice dinner. Sometimes it was a weekend trip. Sometimes it was just a quiet evening at home with my dog, reflecting on how far I'd come. It was my way of honoring that moment, that girl who had stood up in that dining room and refused to accept the lies anymore. I named it my Independence Day. The day I stopped being a victim and became a survivor. The day I stopped waiting for my family to love me properly and started learning to love myself. The day I decided that I deserved better and was willing to fight for it. Now, years later, standing in my office, looking at the wall of framed thank you letters from clients we'd helped, photos of scholarship recipients at their graduations, articles about our advocacy work, I could say with absolute certainty that I had built something meaningful from the ashes of that betrayal. Was it worth what I went through? That's a complicated question. I wouldn't wish my experience on anyone. The pain, the struggle, the sense of abandonment, those were real and terrible. But would I be who I am now without having survived it? Probably not. I might have been comfortable, supported, loved even. But I wouldn't have been forged in fire. I wouldn't have developed this unshakable sense of my own worth. I wouldn't have found my life's purpose in helping others escape similar situations. So maybe the right answer is this: I'm grateful for who I became, even while I grieve for what was taken from me. Both things can be true at once. Family shouldn't be something you have to survive. It should be something that helps you thrive. When your family becomes the obstacle to your well-being rather than the foundation for it, you have every right to step away. You have every right to choose yourself. You have every right to build a new family from people who actually see your value and treat you accordingly. Blood doesn't entitle anyone to exploit you. DNA doesn't give someone permission to steal your future. Being related doesn't mean you have to accept abuse, neglect, or betrayal. These are hard truths, truths that our culture often resists because we're taught that family is everything that you have to forgive, that blood is thicker than water. But the full saying is actually the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The bonds we choose are stronger than the bonds we're born into. And sometimes choosing yourself, protecting yourself, standing up for yourself against your own family is the bravest thing you can do. I look back now at that girl working 3 jobs, exhausted and hungry, believing she wasn't good enough, and I want to hug her. I want to tell her that she's about to discover a strength she doesn't know she has, that the pain she's experiencing isn't her fault, that she deserves so much more than she's been given, that she's going to not only survive but thrive. And I want to tell her that the day she discovers the truth about the stolen money, as horrible as that moment will be, it's also going to be the first day of her real life. The day she stops living in survival mode and starts building the future she actually wants. Because that's what I did. I took the worst betrayal of my life, and I transformed it into purpose. I took the pain of being neglected and exploited by my own parents, and I channeled it into helping others escape similar situations. I took the anger and hurt and sense of injustice, and I built a career, a life, a legacy around making sure other people didn't have to suffer alone the way I did. That Thanksgiving dinner destroyed the family I thought I had. But it gave me the opportunity to build the life I actually needed. And for that, in a strange and complicated way, I'm grateful. So here's what I want you to take away from my story. If you're in a relationship, any relationship where you're being exploited, diminished, stolen from, or abused, you have the right to leave. You have the right to fight back. You have the right to protect yourself, even if the person hurting you is supposed to love you, especially if the person hurting you is supposed to love you. You don't owe loyalty to people who treat you as less than human. You don't owe silence to people who profit from your pain. You don't owe forgiveness to people who refuse to acknowledge their wrongs. You owe yourself protection, respect, and the chance at a better life. It won't be easy. Fighting back never is, especially when it means standing up to family. There will be people who tell you you're overreacting, that you're being cruel, that you're destroying relationships. But remember this, you didn't destroy anything. You're just refusing to keep pretending it wasn't already broken. And on the other side of that fight, on the other side of that pain and fear and uncertainty, there's a life waiting for you. A life where you get to decide your own worth. A life where you're surrounded by people who actually value you. A life where you can finally breathe. That life is worth fighting for. You are worth fighting for. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced financial abuse or exploitation from family members? How did you handle it? What would you have done in my situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if it gave you hope or strength or just made you feel less alone, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Your support helps me continue telling these stories and hopefully helping people find the courage to stand up for themselves. Remember, you deserve better than betrayal. You deserve better than theft. You deserve better than being treated as disposable. And sometimes, claiming the life you deserve means walking away from the people who refuse to see your value. Thank you for listening to my story. Stay strong, stay brave, and know that you're not alone.